Quiet down and listen. Okay, I want to welcome everybody here. Thank you for coming out. I have handouts at the tables so that you can see there's some information on mandates that have been printed and stuff out. So, and then there's a flyer. I'm doing a critical race theory event November 30th, so I put flyers at each table, and you can go online to register for that. Because the space is limited, everybody needs to register, so I appreciate that. So I'm Dee Rubin, and my husband is my partner in crime, and we are sponsoring the event tonight. And we are going to start with Brigida Mulligan leading us in a prayer, so if you just stand quickly.
Bow your heads. Dear God, we come to you today asking for your blessing, guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this event. Guide our hearts and our minds in the spirit of fairness, right thought and speech. Impart your supreme wisdom upon our activities so that our affairs may reach a successful conclusion. Thank you for being our source of guidance today and for all times. Amen.
And Lori Halverson is going to lead us in the pledge. I have flags here and I have flags over there. Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to welcome you. I want to thank my husband, Jeff Rubin, for helping me put this together. I want to thank Clarksburg Tavern, Jan and her daughter Ashley, for being gracious and letting us use her wonderful restaurant. I'd like to thank Beth Lawson from We the People Too from Howard County. Want to stand up, Beth? Thank you. And our video, where'd she go? Tian. Oh, there she is. Thank you. So we have a panel presentation. Each person will have approximately 15 minutes to present. And I left 3x5 cards with a pen at each table. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please write your question down, and towards the end I will come by and pick them up, and we'll basically do the question and answer at that time. Okay? So we're going to start with our man. My man.
Wrong Dan. Wrong one, Dan. Okay, so we have the next governor sitting right here. Yeah. Everybody doesn't know this is Dan Cox. He's a state delegate, husband and father, Republican conservative candidate for the governor of the state of Maryland. And Dan believes in the goodness of God for the people of all our state. He has been a leading force fighting for lives and livelihoods of all Marylanders. He's a lifelong Marylander. Dan has served the people of Maryland as a small businessman, 15 years as a constitutional attorney, state delegate representing one of the largest districts of Maryland, Frederick and Carroll County. We're not in that district here. Close, but not in it, right? Yeah. Very close, but not in it. He has over 130 constituents. Dan's platform, he's enforced the Constitution, our First and Second Amendments, all of the Bill of Rights, and the overreaching mandates, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. provides parents with educational choice, strength through parental rights, and the divisive CRT, which Doreen talked about, Dee talked about. We're having another forum end of the month about that. And Dan believes, of course, reducing taxes, fees, and regulations. And others are Republican, is what it boils down to, right? Okay. This is not part of my notes, but this is not a fundraiser per se. It wasn't meant to be. But after you hear Dan talk, I'm sure a lot of you are going to want to open up your wallets and your checkbooks, because you can't win without some money. And I believe Dan has got some of his people here, so they'll be more than happy to take your donations after anything. Okay? Let me turn it over. Ladies, gentlemen, Dan Cox.
Thank you to you both, and thank you to everyone here tonight. It's really an honor to be here in Montgomery County on behalf of freedom. How many people are excited about what happened in Virginia just a couple weeks back? Yeah. Are there any parents and mama bears here tonight? So you feel free to give my parents for Dan Cox sign as you leave. If we run out, we've got more. I have been privileged to serve in the House of Delegates, and have this is my 4th session coming up. I was elected, privileged to be elected for Frederick and Carroll County. Had an opportunity to run for Congress before that here in Montgomery County. Been on the ballot 4 times here. Really? And I had an opportunity to debate the gentleman named Jamie Raskin. So he's my congressman. I guess he's most of your congressmen. And in that process, I learned that freedom is truly under attack. When you hear about pallets of cash being sent over to our enemies, when you hear about, in particular, the election manipulation going on, where in that race, for instance, Jamie Raskin wanted to open up voting to, and he still does, to anyone present, regardless of status, of legal status. So that wipes away our ability to be a citizen and have a voice, and it wipes away the law. And fast forward to where we are today, as a father, as a husband, 9 children. My wife and I have been married 25 years. I've had a small business for 16 years. I've worked in politics really since my grandmother took me along at age 5 to help drop pamphlets at houses, because she was a vice chair of the Baltimore County Republican Club, and also in our Central Committee, and then the Women's Club there. And I've got it in my blood that, there's something called the parent's rights to raise the child the way God intended. My dad raised us to love God, love our neighbors, and to do what is right, and to take responsibility for ourselves. And one of the things that he did was expand private education and homeschooling in Maryland. So in 1983, the superintendent, who would have thought that would be a thing today, right? Now it's the one thing rescuing a lot of people who want to make their own way in terms of their own medical choices. But my dad was a pioneer in that area, and he's also a pastor. So he launched a school, and as part of the school, he had a homeschool program. And one of the things the state superintendent of schools in Maryland did was called him up and said, if you don't shut your school down, your church school, we're going to arrest you for violating education law. And of course, my father, being a very strong-willed German Kansan, transplanted to Maryland, said, well, sir, the last time I checked, these were our kids. Now, when you decide to have a baby and change its diapers and feed it and raise it and direct its education, then maybe you can decide how that child should be educated. But as for us, we're going to have a school, and we're going to make sure it's professional, and we're going to educate our own kids. And then he hired a really good lawyer. And the rest is history. Now there's close to 30,000 home educators in Maryland. It's a growing movement. And then also the the private school movement. He was a part-time lobbyist with a private school. He helped found several different home education groups, and also was working with Maryland Association of Christian Schools. So he was very involved in Annapolis. Took me down there quite a bit. I learned the ropes of Annapolis since I was young. And one of the things I learned was that you have to make your voices known to be heard, and it can make a difference. Fast forward to today, I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, I was fighting a vaccine mandate in the Maryland legislature where they were going to remove the religious exemption. This was pre-COVID. Well, the bill went up before the Senate, and I'm proud and privileged to be endorsed, by the way, by Informed Choice of Maryland. Any Informed Choicers here today? They're a great group. I recommend getting involved with them. But they called them up, and I called up their leadership, and I said, there's this bill, and they had heard about it. They were tracking it. So they decided to do an email blitz as well as an outreach to the Senate committee, because it had come from the House and went over to the Senate. I believe that was the current status. And within a day or 48 hours, they had over 1,000 people contact the vice chair of the Senate. And she comes up to me the next day and she says, call your people off. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, I've got over 1,000 emails to tell us that this bill, that they don't like this bill that's going to require vaccination in schools and by removing the religious exemption of children. And I think also it was going to tighten up the medical exemption. So I said, well, actually, that's not me. That's real people, real moms and dads. They heard what you're doing, and they want you to withdraw the bill. Well, she said, well, guess what? It's done. The bill's dead. We're withdrawing the bill. And I learned something again. It was a great reminder that if you make your voices heard, and if you are real, you're professional, and you assert the truth, that a lot of times our elected officials will listen. Because at the end of the day, they care about the fact that if X number of people from their jurisdiction makes their voices known, all of a sudden they realize if they're not careful, they will incite a movement against their reelection. And that's the way elections are intended to work, right? And we've seen that now in the COVID situation, the lockdowns. A lot of the courts have deferred to the legislatures, saying, well, if your elected representative goes along with it, why should we interfere? And so all the more we need to make our voices known, and that is why my wife and I got on our knees and said, yes, I have a safe seat. Yes, I won with 63% of the vote and probably doing well for re-election. But if not us now, if not us, who? If not now, when? As Ronald Reagan said. And that's because we have to stand up at a time when it is front and center. Right now, as you know, there are mandates coming down and in place like never before. And those mandates are destroying people's lives. I just had a whistleblower call me today and say that a friend of her son, 13-year-old, in Frederick County, I won't name the school, dropped dead on the basketball court. Wow. 3 days after he received the vaccine. And the worst part of it is they've covered it up, and they have it under a gag rule. Now, I personally have been attacked professionally. I'm currently under attack professionally. There's a gag order on some of that, but we're winning. I've got good lawyers and a bigger God. But the intimidation is not something that you want to bow the knee to. This is our freedom. This is our body. These are our bodies. These are our kids. How dare someone say that they can take a hold of our own bodies and jam something in it that we don't even know what's in it, or that we haven't consented to. Informed consent is a beautiful thing. It says that not only do you have the right to know what it is that you're receiving medically, but you have the right as a sovereign and as an American citizen to say, you know what, I just don't want it. That's called consent. And people go berserk right now saying, well, wait, how dare you? Don't you want the vax? Look, if you want the vax, fine. But don't force it on us. And that's part of this whole medical freedom issue, and that's why when I'm saying I'm going to restore freedom, I mean it. Not only am I pledging to you to restore freedom on day one by restoring the Constitution to each one of us individually, but I'm pledging that if any executive officer or government official in Maryland violates your constitutional rights, I'm implementing the DeSantis rule that says they're the ones that are going to get fined, not the people. You know, when I first started to run, some of the Republicans on the inside said, you know, you're taking a risk because these issues are going to be gone by the time the election rolls around. And I said, first of all, I don't care because the issues are now and we have to speak up now. And if they're gone and the people forget about me, at least I spoke up for my own kids. Number two, I saw the information coming and I didn't think it was going away, and sure enough, what are we looking at now? It just gets worse and worse every day. We had a Fifth Circuit court coming down that I can't wait to hear Jennifer Lester talk about. And what did the President of the United States, alleged, say to the cameras? I couldn't believe it. Are we an American society under the rule of law? He said, ignore it. For crying out loud, this is the federal court of America with a nationwide injunction. It reminded me of my reason for going to law school, and that was I saw a lot of a need for attorneys who actually upheld the Constitution in practical ways, not just in big national cases, but in everyday people's lives. And that was because my parents taught me and had me read things like Lex Rex. How many people have heard of the old principles? June 15th, 1215, we had the Magna Carta signed on the hill, on the fields of Runnymede. Have you heard that story? It gave us the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which gave us things like, as citizens, the right to a jury trial. Okay, you know, most of the world doesn't have that right. You go to France, you don't have a right to a jury. But in England, in America, our heritage is you have a right to a jury trial. And some of those issues dated because of the way the kings are misusing the law, because what was taught then was Rex Lex. The king is the law. And our forefathers flipped it around and said, no, 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 we're done with that. Lex Rex, the law is the king. No one is above the law. That's our American heritage, and that's what I intend to restore right here in Maryland. Because that is going to bring a path to freedom for us. And that applies. Do you know right now, there's, for instance, in the CRT issue, the Education Code requires teaching of American exceptionalism, American independence, American patriotism, the flag, the national anthem. It's in the Education Code. How many schools are actually teaching this? In fact, they're teaching the opposite. That's why I'm so privileged that the running mate that we have for Lieutenant Governor, Jordana Schiffinelli, she and her husband took on the Queen Anne's County Board of Education when they were pulling their children out to march in rallies to encourage even the burning of police cars. I mean, it was beyond the pale of what was being taught. It was not about equality, it was about equity and retribution and riot. That was what was being taught to these kids. She said, enough is enough, we're not going to do this. Not on my watch, not with my kids. She and her husband did a writing campaign because the election filing deadlines had passed, so they did a writing campaign. They were told, no, no. How many times do people win on a writing campaign? Never. 14,000 write-in votes later, they took over the Board of Education and changed history for Queen Anne's County. That's a proven winner. That's somebody just like you who spoke up and did something and would not stop until they won. And that's what we're going to do in this race. The issues are too important for us. If we lose on the issues, we are going to lose basic principles for generations to come. We cannot let that happen. When you look at these mandates, I think the issues that I've been asked to mention is, well, what do we do from here? What are some of the options? Well, in my law practice, I'm doing my level best to help some friends, but I refer a lot to people who are experts like Jennifer Lester. I'll defer to some of that. So this is not a legal advice statement. But the time has come, in my opinion, to defy and to file your civil rights complaints against anyone who would denounce or trounce your religious freedom. And I don't even think that we should have to file, now thankfully you can file a religious freedom exemption, but why would you have to do that if the risk of the vax is a potential for death? Okay, so they're going to risk you with death, when if you're under the age of 60, it's a 0.9997 chance, likelihood, not chance, likelihood that you'll survive COVID. So even if it wasn't that good of a chance, this should be a choice. Our medical freedoms are at stake. They claim a lot of times, you hear this, that they're not forcing this on us. They just take everything away from you until you bow the knee. That's why the Nuremberg Code was very clear, and it says force or coercion, right? Many of you know about that code. It's published on the NIH website. It's published on the FDA website. Our experts are required to follow it. Our boys are buried in Normandy right now, having established it in World War II. And I will not back down from defending our human rights. This is a major issue. We cannot ever back down from it. So let me paint some hope here. Where's the hope in blue, deep blue Maryland? Okay, here's the hope. This is it's no longer a right and left issue. This is an issue of freedom that expands all parties and all people. Everyone appreciates freedom. Anyone who says, go ahead and kill me or risk my death because I don't care, you're bigger than me, is lying to you. The natural response to someone trying to force someone, the natural right that we have is to say no. And we have that enshrined in our Constitution. And it's something that we can apply because the Constitution, which I carry with me, oops, that's my card. By the way, you can get my cards. There's a nice little donation link. The Constitution doesn't just execute itself. It doesn't apply itself. It doesn't happen on its own. It's there as a tool for each one of us to use to enforce and protect our rights and those of our families and others. We have to do it. It's time we have to do it. That's why I think, and I've heard, this is again, educational advice, not legal, but I've heard many people in Pennsylvania, thousands in Pennsylvania are fighting the mandates by filing civil rights actions. Now in my employment law experience, it's a process. You should get an attorney. You should look up, try to find an employment attorney to help you. But it's time we fight. It's time you stand up. Don't just acquiesce. Don't just walk away. This land is your land. This land is my land. That's the path forward. And this is America, and this is Maryland. And what does Maryland have as a heritage? The Free State. The national anthem. The history of being the middle temperament that says we're going to find a path forward for everyone under the Constitution and law. Now my opponent, you may have heard, has just this week come out and said, she said, well, I'm against mandates too, so there's no difference between me and Dan. Well, I beg to differ, and I'm telling you this only because this is a primary. And a primary under law, election code, I think it's 5701, is desired by the parties for one reason, to expose the differences between the candidates. So here's the difference. I have fought for years. 2 years ago I fought against CRT. 2 years ago I began fighting against the overreach with the vax. Last year I fought and helped kill HB 650, which was to seize private property during an emergency. I actually voted for that bill because it had Governor Hogan's name on it, and I thought it must be good. Until I got to page 10, because you have to read very fast when you get all these 3,000 bills coming at you on the House floor. So I'm reading through and everybody's voting green. I'm like, well, I guess I should be green, Governor Hogan. And I got to page 10 and it said, in a potential emergency, the governor can seize your private property without remuneration. I'll get that word out right. So I jumped up and said, Madam Speaker, I'm a red on the board. Please change my vote. I could not believe it. So then we went to work. And listen to this. We did a video, 10,000 views later, I got a call from the governor's office. He said, if you take, his staff, if you take the video down, we will pull the bill from the Senate committee. I said, deal. And they pulled the bill and it did not pass. That was before COVID. HB 650, pre-COVID. that's the path forward, and here is the hope for each one of us. We have hope in ourselves and in God Almighty. The fourth stanza of the national anthem says, "And thus be it ever, when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may our heaven-rescued land praise the power that has made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and may this be our motto. In God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave." And this is why I'm running. The difference between my opponent and myself is stark. I have fought these things from day one. I've stood for you. I've fought with every grace that I could. It's been hard at times, I'll be honest. I've been smeared. I was on the House floor fighting for children. They were changing the law last year to allow children to be advised for chemical sex change operations at age 12 behind their parents' backs, okay? I don't care what side of the fence you're on any of that issue. You don't go behind parents' backs ever, period. That's why we have parents. And I stood up on the House floor and fought for that, and I got vilified. My opponent doesn't show up for those things. For instance, on the issue of the vax mandate, she says now that she's against him. But on her Facebook page, she said that Governor Hogan's order to the state healthcare workers to get the vaccine or lose your job, the jab or the job, or she called it a reasonable choice to get swabbed in your nose twice a week and have basically a vaccine passport. That's unacceptable. This is our American freedom at stake. I have stood against that from day one. I stood against the mask mandate. I was vilified for that. I said, no, hold on a second. These masks, first of all, are scientifically questionable by every doctor I've read. They're okay maybe for bacterial droplets, but not viral. It's common sense, it's clear science. But regardless, this is a precursor when you force it to a forced vaccine passport. And you know what? I was told that you're nuts, you're conspiracy theorists. Here we are, folks, QR codes, okay? And my opponent stood up and said, wear the damn mask. Okay? I'm telling you this because I'm exposing the lies. That's the way the light shines. It's the only way the light can shine. And there's a lot of money behind this 20 months of fight that we've been in. Has a huge amount of international money. A very large part of it comes from the pharmaceutical industry, which, by the way, I have nothing against, generally. I don't like it when they've experimented, of course. I think that's crimes against humanity. But there are obviously great things that have been done in saving people's lives. I actually did my dissertation in law school on the benefits of, the historical benefits of ethical vaccines, okay? And the 14th Amendment and the rights that we have to not be forced it was called forced vaccination. Can you believe that? 2003, 2004 or whatever, I did a paper on that, never knowing that this would come. And the issue is therefore in front and center of you. The government may not force this. My opponent has done that. She stood with our governor to do that. She stood with the Biden mandates. Since when has anyone in power in Maryland said anything in opposition to what Biden is doing, other than maybe on CNN once in a while? Oh, yeah. And while they say that, you know what they're doing in the back room? The health department of Maryland right now is encouraging the coercion of our children for vaccination on this experimental vaccine. And everyone knows, every expert that I have talked with knows that this is an experiment on kids. It is not good. It needs to be opposed. Any kind of governmental coercion like that is wrong. And so that's what I pledge to you. I don't mean to belabor my little speech, but I'm here to take questions too, hopefully at the end. We've got some great speakers coming up. I'm asking for your vote. Let me tell you something. We are up against the deadline. The deadline is December 31st for me because the Democrats want to shut down my fundraising during session. Okay. Apparently, my opponent gets to fundraise, I'm told, but not me. Even though she's dealing out millions of dollars with the Commerce Department, somehow me, just piddly me, with a vote, could be bought. So, all right, fine, I'm turning off on my fundraising on January 12th. I need your help. It's a race for reality, for all of us. So if you can do what you can by December 31st, that's my hard and fast. And I've got some very exciting people waiting in the wings to see if I hit those numbers. So thanks so much. God bless you. CoxForFreedom.com. CoxForFreedom.com. Thank you.
Dan, we're gonna get you got your dinner coming sooner or later over here. Yes, to get from one, Maryland's not a big state, but, if you think about Western Maryland to Ocean City, it's got to cover it all. Yeah. Okay, our next speaker, Jennifer Lester, in the battle between David and Goliath, David wins and shows us that the power one, however small, can have. Throughout her professional career, Jennifer Lester has been a David fighting on behalf of others for justice and liberty. Jennifer has been an attorney since 2004. She is a lifelong Marylander, and for the past 16 years has provided legal representation to business owners and individuals across the state. Her academic background spans the University of Baltimore Law School, the University of Maryland School of Architecture in College Park, and University of Baltimore campus. She is a proud mother, a tireless community organizer, a legal advocate who is currently challenging the University of Maryland system in their continued enforcement of COVID-19 vaccines. Please welcome Jennifer.
Thank you for having me here, and thanks to Dan Cox. Everyone should vote for Dan. He's going to do this state a world of good. And I'm so glad Dan started with the Constitution, because I'm going to talk for a minute about the Constitution as well. One of the most important aspects of our Constitution and our government is the separation of power that exists in our framework of our government between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. And this is something I brought up in my argument to the court on the University of Maryland vaccine mandate case. And it's something that is under attack right now in our country. Basically, the way that I see what's happening with COVID is the legislative branch is not functioning. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's the politicians or just the structure that's been set up, but the executive branch of our government has taken the power from the legislative branch, and they are unlawfully and against our Constitution making decisions, creating law which is beyond the scope of the executive branch. And in violation of our Constitution with everything related to COVID. Every time President Biden signs an executive order or makes some kind of statement that one of his executive agencies, such as OSHA, is going to issue a mandate, that is a violation of our Constitution. And the important thing for us to remember, this is how our individual rights are violated. Because that balance of power between the three branches of government, that is what protects us as individuals and protects our rights, each and every one of our rights. And I just want folks to, when they think about these vaccine mandates, something else that Dan brought up is about the international involvement in what's happening in this country and the money behind what is happening. And I was listening to a speech by Robert Kennedy Jr. A lot of you are probably familiar with him and his work with the Children's Defense Fund. It's great. He's remarkable in what he's doing. And he was talking about what's happening with COVID and with the vaccine mandates. And one of the things he brought up, which I think is really important for all of us to remember and to put into context with what's happening today, is what's happening with our economy. I think this OSHA mandate was a way for the federal government to attack businesses. You know, our country, our economy is really built on the back of small businesses. And when you say to an employer with 100 or more employees they have to mandate this vaccine or engage in very expensive testing, and they're going to be fined astronomical amounts of money by our federal government for not following these unlawful mandates, That's just another attack against small businesses in this country. And what Robert Kennedy had to say about this issue is the following. I'm gonna paraphrase the beginning, but then I'll tell you what the direct quote is from him. So Robert Kennedy said that what's happened since March 2020 under the guise of a public health threat caused by a coronavirus, which a coronavirus is nothing more than the common cold. Okay, so what does that tell you? It tells you it's never going to end until we demand that it ends. And I'll tell you how I think we can do that. There's a couple ways. Robert Kennedy went on to say, we've seen and are seeing the destruction of our constitutional rights, which we all know, we're all experiencing that. Not just our individual constitutional rights, but the structure of our constitutional republic. And what Kennedy said, which I thought was right on point and very important for all of us to remember, we're witnessing, quote, the biggest shift of wealth in human history. $3.8 trillion were transferred from working people to a handful of billionaires, many of them from Silicon Valley. And the whole entire, the entire world has been impoverished through the lockdowns we experienced through COVID-19, but we have 500 new billionaires. And this is just going to get worse. If we do not stand up and we allow these vaccine passports to come in, sorry, I'm not going to pronounce this word correctly, our economic system being digitalized, tied to our vaccine passport status, that's just going to be more of a transference of wealth to these wealthy individuals that are running the show. So we really have to stand up against that and stop that from happening. And I just want to also say tonight we do have good news, because on Friday at around 7 o'clock, the Fifth Circuit Appellate Court, Federal Appellate Court, came out with a ruling in a case involving a lawsuit against OSHA and Biden, the Biden administration. And this lawsuit originated in Texas and involved a group of small businesses and individuals who were impacted by the vaccine mandate for employers with 100 or more employees. And that vaccine mandate was issued officially on November 5th. Well, by the afternoon of November 5th, an injunction request had been filed in the Fifth Circuit Court, which was granted. That stay was immediately granted. Briefs were due the following week, and on Friday, November 12th, we have a ruling from Judge Engelhardt out of the Fifth Circuit Appellate Court, which is out of Louisiana. And this is what, I just want to read you what the judge had to say, and everyone should try to get a copy of the opinion. I can probably email it to you if you contact me, or you can find it online. And what the judge said in this opinion was remarkable, because it was a lot of the arguments I made in my pleadings to the court in Maryland, the Fourth Circuit Court, on the vaccine mandate with the university. So I'm hoping the judge in our case, who is weighing motions to dismiss at this time from the university, reads that opinion and decides to go along with what the Fifth Circuit is saying. So what the judge said in that case was, I'm going to quote this, it's brilliant, his opinion is really brilliant. He says, quote, after the president voiced his displeasure with our country's vaccination rate in September, the administration pored over the U.S. code in search of authority or a workaround for imposing a national vaccine mandate. The reason I love that statement is because the judge is saying exactly what's going on. We're not hearing what's going on. We're hearing, a bunch of spins on what's going on to make it sound like this is important, for our public health, etc. And it's just not. It's just not true. If we need this kind of mandate, the proper place for this to be decided is in our Congress. It's in our state legislative bodies. But you'll hear, as I read through this opinion, Congress isn't even the right place for a decision like this. The vehicle the administration landed on was an OSHA ETS, and that's an emergency temporary standard. The statute empowering OSHA allows OSHA to bypass typical notice and comment proceedings for 6 months by providing for an emergency temporary standard to take immediate effect upon publication in the Federal Register, which we all witnessed. And what that means is, administrative law is pretty boring, but I actually excelled in that in law school. And it's just basically a bunch of rules on how our laws are supposed to be implemented and kind of decided by our administrative agencies, our regulatory bodies. And in order to pass any of these regulations, you have to provide for public comment. That's a part of our democratic process, to provide for public comment, public input into the businesses and individuals these regulations affect. Well, the administrative department, the executive branch, they ignored the right for the public to be involved in the process, which is, we have seen happening over the last 20 months. Our voice is being quashed by our government. The court went on to say that the mandate violates the Commerce Clause. And the judge said, the mandate likely exceeds the federal government's authority under the Commerce Clause because it regulates non-economic inactivity that falls squarely within the state's police power. Now, this is something else I argued in my pleadings to the court in the university case. What's the police power? The police power are a special group of powers that are given to the states only. The federal government cannot make any laws regarding, for example, public health. Public health is a state police power. It's supposed to be decided at the local level. And the federal government to issue a mandate like this totally obliterates the rights of our states, of the rights of you and I at a state level to participate in this process. So the court is saying that this is a violation of the state's police power. And the non-economic activity is, quote, a person's choice to remain unvaccinated and forego regular testing is non-economic activity. So I thought that was remarkable because the judge is saying, not only does this mandate encroach upon our individual rights to refuse to accept a vaccine, but we also have a right to forego the invasive testing that is a requirement of the mandate. To mandate, and the judge went on to say, quote, to mandate that a person receive a vaccine or undergo testing falls squarely within the state's police power. Again, so the court is acknowledging that the federal government is running roughshod over states' rights. The court went on to talk about how if Congress were to delegate this authority to OSHA, that might be a different story. Then OSHA may have the right to issue these kinds of emergency regulations. And the court said, no, Congress has not done that, and that is not appropriate. The court said, quote, the mandate derives its authority from old statute employed in a novel manner, imposing nearly $3 billion in compliance costs, involves broad medical considerations that lie outside of OSHA's core competencies, and purports to definitely resolve one of today's most hotly debated political issues. So again, the judge in this case, remarkably, is saying, look, we understand what's happening with this federal agency. They are running around issuing mandates they are not authorized to do, that it's going to cost our small businesses billions of dollars, and they're resolving a political issue. And that's what COVID-19 vaccine mandates are. They're political issues. And so where does that bring us? Well, we have to get better people in office, like Dan Cox, you know. We have to follow the money. We have to look at who is making the money off of these mandates. The pharmaceutical companies. Who is funding our politicians that are making these decisions to issue these mandates? The pharmaceutical companies. And so us as individuals, we have to take back our legislative process. We have to take back and get people into office that we know will not be beholden to the pharmaceutical industry and to corporations and interests that have nothing to do with our individual lives, but are only about making a large profit for themselves and possibly other motives that we don't know about. The other thing I wanted to tell folks that they should do is nonviolent noncompliance. These mandates are not illegal, they are not authorized by law, they are unconstitutional. You have a judge that is saying this, okay? A federal court appellate judge is making these statements, and 2 other judges signed on to this opinion with him. This was not a 1-judge decision, this was a 3-judge decision. So I'm sure the case is going to be appealed by the Biden administration. We'll see what happens, but you know, I think what the judge is saying is this is a violation of our constitutional rights. It's a violation of the government's structure. The executive branch is overstepping its boundaries, and we as individuals do not have to comply. I think it's really important that when you don't comply, you do it in a calm, peaceful manner. Do not get violent. You know, violence will only lead to further erosion of our rights. But if you stand up and you say no, there's not really anything they can do. They can't say, okay, they could try to make it difficult for you, but I think the more that more and more people stand up and say no and do not comply, the more quickly this is going to end. That's kind of how I see it. And if you have questions for me after, please come up and ask me questions, and I can give you my card. Sometimes I have a hard time getting back to folks because I'm helping a lot of people with trying to get exemptions and deal with these issues. But there's another speaker coming right after me, Jennifer Luca, and she's going to tell you about the success of nonviolent non-compliance. Get that phrase in your head, because it's through that and getting good people in office and fighting through the courts, getting the courts to step up to the plate and enforce the Constitution that we're going to win this battle. So thank you.
Let me give you a little introduction, okay, Don? Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Frank Dituralia, so we'll call him Dr. Frank, all right? Dr. Frank is originally from Washington, D.C., completed his undergraduate studies at Bethany College in West Virginia, where he studied chemistry. He then pursued medicine as a career and completed medical school at the University of St. Thomas. Following his graduation, Dr. Frank completed residency in internal medicine at Jersey Shore Medical Center and at the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Jersey. He currently works as an urgent care physician, where he nearly every day, Dr. Frank sees patients with symptoms of COVID-19. He recognizes the nuisances of the disease, but he also understands the safety and efficiency implications of COVID-19 vaccines. Let's hear it for Dr. Frank, please.
Hello. Nice to meet all of you. Actually, I'm an emergency room physician for the past 35 years, and I'm retired now, but I'm going to open an urgent care center next year, God willing. And this, I wasn't really supposed to talk about this, but this urgent care center will not accept any insurance at all. No Medicare, no Medicaid, no private insurance. So you have to pay cash. And the reason why I'm doing that is so that there's complete freedom. The insurance companies don't know your medical record. I'm not going to have an electronic medical record. It's going to be on paper. So when you come there, your medical information will be private, and only I will know and you will know what it is, and nobody has access to it. So that's why I'm opting out of Medicare. You know, the government does not want you to do that. You have to have each patient sign an opt-out of Medicare contract, and you have to renew it every 2 years. And then, obviously, my prices would have to be reasonable because people have to pay cash. But anyway, that's the future. But anyway, I'm here today to talk about vaccines, and as an emergency room physician, I really don't know a lot about vaccines because that's not really part of my job. That's never been for the past 35 years. So I have been actually studying about this for a month or so. This is the second time I've been asked to speak. And I'm going to tell you what I discovered. I'm not sure how it fits in legally, but I found out So this is really sort of the regulatory medical aspect of vaccines. And I found out that there's basically two types of vaccines or medications. There's the ones that are that have been legalized or by the Food and Drug Administration, and those that are experimental. So if you have an experimental vaccine, you cannot force somebody to take it because they have to agree to be part of an experiment. So that's the experimental side. And all the vaccines that are on the market, and actually all the medicines for COVID on the market now, are experimental. Now, we're not talking about experimental like, you know, Frankenstein experimental. We're just talking about the usual process of making sure vaccines and medications are safe and that they work. That's what experimental is. And once it's licensed by the FDA, then I found out, once it's licensed, they can mandate it. They can force you to take it once the FDA, at least this is what the statutes I read, say. So that's why children in public school can be mandated to take the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine because it's been licensed, it's been approved by the FDA. But to get to be approved by the FDA, it has to go through all the phases of the experiment. They have to test it on rats, they have to test it on phase 1 trial, phase 2, phase 3, and some medications or vaccines get pulled off the market after they get to phase 4 because they're too dangerous. And like Vioxx was one of those medications that they had to pull off after it completed phase 4. So anyway, how is it that we are forced to take vaccines that are experimental? I couldn't get my brain around this. So I went to studying, and what I discovered is there's this thing that came out of 9/11 with President Bush called the PrEP Act. And under the PrEP Act, they can have an emergency use authorization of an experimental vaccine or drug. They can't force you to take it, but they can release it before it's safe and effective, and you can take it if you want to. And that's what all the vaccines are. They're in the experimental phase. You need to have informed consent. You actually need informed consent for any medication or procedure, but you definitely need it if you're going to participate in an experimental vaccine, which this is. So, I was listening to National Public Radio, which I still do, to hear what the other side is thinking, on August the 23rd, and they said the Pfizer vaccine has received FDA approval. And I just said, okay, well, I guess this story is over. You know, I know that you can mandate, you know, licensed vaccines. But what I discovered in this week of study is that, yes, the Pfizer vaccine called, the name of it is Comirnaty. It has been licensed by the FDA, but they don't make it. It's not one of the vaccines that's on the market today. And why is that? Why wouldn't they? I mean, it'd be a slam dunk. They'd have the only licensed vaccine, and everyone would have to take it, because all the other ones are not. But they won't release it. And why is that? I didn't know. So we went to digging, and what we found out is it has to do with liability. Can you sue the pharmaceutical company for the vaccine? And you cannot sue them. And why is that? The reason, at least from my study, is that they're experimental. They are released under emergency use authorization. That comes under the PrEP Act. Under the 9/11, they were afraid there would be anthrax, and they thought there was going to be smallpox, and so they said we're going to be able to release these drugs and vaccines on an emergency basis, but they're going to still be experimental. And the pharmaceutical companies are going to be completely exempt from any liability if it's released under the emergency use authorization. So that's what all the vaccines are. No liability for Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, or Moderna. They're experimental, emergency use authorization, no liability. But the one that the FDA Comirnaty, it's been licensed. But Pfizer's not giving that one. They're giving the other one they have complete liability protection from. The one that's been licensed, they don't want that one out there. And why? Because once a vaccine is licensed, Pfizer is open to complete liability. You can sue them for every death, every side effect that they can have. And so they won't release it for that reason. That is why they won't. So it's sitting on the shelf. So when I heard that on National Public Radio, I said, okay, the Pfizer vaccine has been licensed. Yeah, but they're not using that one. They're using all the other ones. And from my understanding is all the medications that are out there to be used for coronavirus are under emergency use authorization. They're all experimental. You have to sign informed consent. So anyway, I don't know about the OSHA way to get around this, but this apparently is what the FDA is trying to do to force this vaccine, because they got a problem. They cannot mandate a vaccine that is experimental. It's got to be voluntary. The only vaccine that they can mandate is the licensed one. And the licensed one is not on the market. And they have no intention of bringing it on the market because they're going to accept full liability for any deaths. So there it sits. So, I don't know what the next step is, but they got a problem. They can't mandate. They're trying to sort of pull the wool over our eyes and say, well, Pfizer has this vaccine that's licensed, but it's not around. It's the same as the other one that's not licensed, and we want you to take that one, but they can't actually force you to take it. So that's true. You just have to say no. So anyway, what will happen? My thinking, and I don't know, is that eventually they will get this vaccine under some sort of a protection where you cannot sue them. Because right now you can sue them. There's 17,000 deaths, and every one of them, can you imagine those wrongful death suits, how much money? It would be no longer profitable for them. And all the side effects. 600,000 side effects. There'd be no money in this. They're not going to do it. So there was a similar problem in the 1990s, in the 1980s rather, and at that time mothers were saying, well, we hear that some autistic kids are getting that way through these vaccines, and we're not so sure we want this, and the federal government was worried about it. So they passed the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program in the 1980s, and in that program, 75 cents of every vaccine dollar goes to this fund, and you can't sue Pfizer or AstraZeneca. But you got this big pile of money that you can get if you get injured. So that's how they mandate MMR, polio, hepatitis B vaccines in school kids. That's what I understand the statute says. Now, under the PrEP Act, which is how we got this emergency use authorization for the experimental vaccines, they have another fund, or they have another way to keep the pharmaceutical companies from having liability for the damages from their vaccine, and that's called the Countermeasure Injury Compensation Program. So when they have emergency use authorization for experimental vaccine, they have this compensation program which is not funded. There's no money in it. Congress has to come up with the money. You can get, it's taxpayers, you can get this money if they let you. But in order to get this compensation, the HHS has to agree to allow you, and nobody gets any money, and it's a complete waste of time. But anyway, so the point of this is there's no vaccine that they can mandate that's on the market. They're going to try to trick you into thinking that the one that they have licensed, which they're not giving, is same as the one that they have not licensed, which is experimental and for which they have complete liability protection. And in any event, I can go on and tell you other things that I discovered, but that is the basic point of what I discovered in my research.
Can I add something?
Sure, go ahead, ask.
So actually, it's not asking. They also need to, for the licensed vaccines, they need to completely describe their content, which they do not complete. And the second thing is that the criteria of producing these vaccines that are experimental and licensed are completely different. As soon as you start producing these vaccines, it's a completely different production cycle and different conditions. So, so maybe we will never get them.
Okay. So anyway, that's the whole point of what I did on research, and there's other things I can talk about, but I'll go ahead and give up and try to keep on time here, and let our next speaker speak. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more very interesting speaker, Jennifer Luca. For those of you who know Jennifer Luca, the phrase velvet steel sometimes comes to mind. Jennifer is a patriot of deep resolve and common sense. Common sense, that's something in short supply these days, no? Yeah, she knows when to put up a fight, and she knows when to relax her fist and extend a hand of friendship. Who wrote this? Jennifer gave up in New Jersey, she grew up in New Jersey, and she has since made her home in Howard County. She's a small business owner and an insurance agent, but her real passion is being the proud mother of her 3 sons, which we're going to hear about in a minute. She has fought tirelessly for her children's education. She has endured severe harassment on social media, but has not flinched. Jennifer and others in her group can be found getting their steps in while making calls to the governor's office. Let's hear from Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with such an eloquent panel, and I'm not nearly as eloquent, so I have notes, and so you'll have to forgive me as I look at my notes. I'm going to start by saying that this is not about a virus, and it never has been about a virus. I have 3 sons who went through the Howard County public school system, much to my chagrin, and I'm on my last son. He's a senior in high school. He's played football every year since he was 7, including all of high school. He, prior to this incident happening, which was around Yom Kippur, I had been told, I actually spent a month in Florida last year, and I found out about a constitutional lawyer named KrisAnne Hall. And she has a movie out called Non-Compliant. Well, I had never watched it. I know all about her, I follow her on Facebook, I've seen other videos with her, but I've never watched the actual movie. The night before this happened, I happened to watch the movie. It's about an hour and a half. I highly suggest everyone watch it. And I don't think that it was a coincidence that I happened to watch this movie, and then the next day I get a call from my son's school. School had just basically started, and I wasn't overly familiar with some of their protocols that were happening, and my son is not vaccinated. And he's a 17-year-old boy. In fact, my boys are 29, 25, and 17. None of them are vaccinated. None of them are going to get vaccinated. My husband works for Medicare. He will not get vaccinated. I will not get vaccinated. My future daughter-in-law will not get vaccinated. End of story, okay? I'm not an anti-vaxxer. My kids obviously have had all their school vaccines, quote unquote, and you can get the vaccine if you want, but it's not the right choice for me and my family. So I get a call from my son's principal. They have 3 or 4 principals, and one of the principals calls me and says that my son was possibly around someone who was possibly COVID positive. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, is he vaccinated? And I said, vaccinated for what? So of course it was for COVID-19. And I said, well, why would he be vaccinated? He's 17 and he is an athlete, and I'm not going to vaccinate him. Do you not know anything about myocarditis? That's what happens with young boys. Anyway, she told me that he was not allowed to come back to school for 10 days. This was on a Wednesday. And I told her that she absolutely was not keeping my child out of school. especially after the year of not being in school. My son was coming back to school the next day. And she told me that it was Yom Kippur and he couldn't come to school. Sorry, okay. So I called 17 lawyers that night. Not one of them would talk to me. Not one of them would give me any advice. Not one. Now, I didn't know Jennifer Lester at the time, which is kind of how we've met. But once the principal or assistant principal told me that, once she knew that I was going to fight back against her protocol, she quickly told me that the nurse was going to call back and talk to me about it. Okay. The nurse calls 5 minutes later and tries to tell me that my son has been possibly around a COVID positive case, and because of their protocols, he cannot come back to school till the following Friday, 10 days. I said, no, my son's coming back to school tomorrow or Friday because you guys have had him out of school. Has no symptoms. He had 0 symptoms, and I want to know who the kid is that he was possibly around. She told me that she couldn't tell me because it was privacy. So I can't talk to my own son and ask him if he was around another student who possibly tested positive, right? Makes sense. And I said, none of this makes sense. Well, she told me she was just trying to protect the children. And I said, you're going to protect the children, really? Are you going to protect them from doing drugs? Are you going to protect them from not having protected sex? Are you going to protect them for driving drunk? And she told me that I was rude and basically hung up on me. Well, I finally ended up getting in touch with an attorney who is very liberal, I'll say that. He's a friend of my boss. My boss is very conservative. He knows a lot of people. I called this man at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and basically he told me that I should have my child vaxxed, including me, because one day he's going to come to my funeral and he's going to tell everybody that I didn't get vaxxed. And I was like, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. You'll be the one who's dead and not me. And believe me, I said it. I'm from New Jersey, okay? Anyway, he gave me one good piece of advice for that day, and that was my son's name is Dominic, take Dominic to get tested and get your test back negative and send your child back to school. That's the only way that you're going to have a leg to stand on, basically. Because nobody wants to take on the school system, whatever. So I did that the next day, which was Yom Kippur. They were off school. I took them for a rapid test and a PCR test. Both tests. They both came back negative, basically. I sent him back to school on Friday morning. And he went to his, of course, he's not like me. He's very laid back and calm. He's a 17-year-old boy who doesn't want to, be confronted by any, issues. I totally get that. But they immediately pulled him out of class and segregated him from everybody else. And I said, you call me when they take you out, because, of course that's what they're going to try to do. And I basically called them and told them that I know my constitutional rights and my son is allowed to come back to school. My constitutional rights are you have to educate my children, and you work for me, not the other way around. So, of course, like Dan, 2 weeks after the 15 days to flatten the curve, or whatever it was, whatever BS line they gave us, I pushed back against wearing the mask because it's a sign of oppression, it's slavery, it is dehumanizing, and classically, through time, obviously, people have masked slaves. So I have always been against the masks. Well, of course, I've had a lot of pushback about that. I had a run-in with my son's coach for football about the mask because, making athletes work out with a mask. I'm sorry, hello, I can't do this. And basically he told me that, listen lady, I'm just trying to run a football program. Yeah, I get it. You're just trying to get your money, get your team to the championship or whatever, and you don't really care about the kids. And I told him you have to stand up for what's right and not just for what you want. Like you want your team to go to the championships. How about doing what's right for the kids?
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, fruitless. He's on my hit list. Okay. My son was pulled out. I told him that he had to come back. He had 2 negative tests. They did send him home. But they did tell me that he could come back on Monday. So I didn't win the battle, but I told my son that I'll win the war. When he came home from the different principal that he talked to when he was pulled out, he came home and said, "Mom, she really likes you." And I said, "Really?" Now, I'm not a mean person, but I tell you like it is. I don't swear at you and I call you names, but I just tell you like it is. I'm not afraid of confrontation. And he was like, "She really likes you and she wants you to stand up for the kids." I said, "Okay, you got it." The deal is that the Constitution is in place for every single protocol that they bring down. You test it against the Constitution, and if it doesn't work for you or your family, then you say you don't comply. You don't have to be violent about it. You just have to say, "I'm not complying." Peaceful non-compliance. That's it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to have questions and answers in a second. I would like to make one comment. When Doreen or Dee, it's one and the same person. I don't know who I'm getting in bed with tonight. It's going to be Dee or Doreen, one of the two. So in any case, when she was looking for places to do these forums, we're here and it's great, but you would not believe how many places turned us down. And I know in Howard County last week they had the same issue. So let's thank I want to thank the restaurant, but I want to thank the staff. Okay. And when you put those tips in, be generous, because we want them, when we ask them, can we come back, we want the help to say, get them back here, get them back here. Okay, so we're going to do question and answers. I'm not going to read them. You going to read them? I don't have my glasses on. How about Doctor, you to read them? Can you read them?
Regarding mandates on federal employees and military, what points of leverage exist to reject the vaccine and surrender medical privacy? Well, they're experimental vaccines and they can't be mandated. Now, I can tell you the military has a deal with the FDA. I guess they call that a memorandum of understanding, you know, because you can't sue the you can't sue the government as a soldier, and you can't sue the military. But I think and the lawyers can correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's some liability for the company that makes the vaccine. No. How about for the mandated? I'm sorry, for the licensed vaccine. There's nothing. All right. Well, then just say no.
But it has to be a legal vaccine now. It can't be experimental.
Okay.
I have an answer to that if you want. Should we sit down here?
Yeah, why don't we get the panel to sit here and they can take the questions.
So, test. So my best friend from law school is a top JAG officer right now working on this issue, and I've discussed this at length with him, but there's a DOD directive, DOD 1301, I think, I can't remember the exact site, that guarantees religious freedom exemptions on these kinds of issues, such as vaccines. It was won in court regarding the anthrax vaccine not too long ago, and so that precedent should apply to this one as well. Unfortunately, a top chaplain friend of mine also told me that he's been directed directly from a White House source through the Pentagon, apparently, to deny religious exemptions because it has to go up through the chaplaincy a lot of times, the way the chain of command works. So this is a big fight with the military, and I think that the procedure that I've been told, and again, this is educational advice, educational discussion, not legal advice, make that very clear for everybody watching, that you file an IG complaint, is what I'm informed of, and the IG complaint has to go up to the Secretary of the Navy or the Army or the Marines or whatever it is. And the IG complaint can also, there are other remedies as well if they're not going to, if they refuse to grant you your exemption. So I think that was particular to the question. I don't know if that helps. Did I answer the, was that? I don't know the, can I see that card? Do you have that military card? You got rid of it, okay, never mind. I hope that was helpful.
Take a question.
Can I lie and say I'm vaccinated when a job interviewer asks because I'm honest and say no and get out or get something? What can I do?
Well, I would never suggest that anybody lie about anything. I'm an attorney after all. If you're in a job interview, they really should not be asking you questions about your medical history. For some reason, employers think that's okay to do that now, and I've actually heard from young attorneys I've been mentoring who are out looking for jobs that law firms are asking them on job interviews if they're vaccinated, which I have to say I'm not surprised, actually. But if you're on a job interview, I mean, everyone's caught in a very precarious situation right now, because some of you are faced with these situations where if you do what you know is right, which is to say, excuse me, but are you really supposed to be asking me that kind of question on a job interview? Which they're not. That probably is going to mean that you don't get the job. So, you know, you have to decide for yourself if you want that job bad enough at that moment in time where you're going to kind of play the game to get into the job, or if you're just going to take a position to stand up and do what you know is morally right, and look for another job where they're not going to so flagrantly violate the law. And I just wanted to point out, the Fifth Circuit Court ruling, I mean, there is a stay across this entire country. OSHA is not permitted under this Fifth Circuit Appellate Court order to enforce this mandate, this 100 employee mandate. So there's no company out there, no private company, under the OSHA regulations anyway, which can mandate the vaccine. And if your employer is insisting on that, I would get them a copy of this order and say, excuse me, but your OSHA is under a stay not to enforce this order, and so you cannot make me comply with something that is not allowed to be enforced. So that would be if you're brave enough to do that, then I would think your employer would actually value that in their employees.
Jennifer, may I ask you like a general question from place?
Sure.
Okay, so we know that Hans Riemer, who is like council member at large,
Right.
he has, from my point of view and from many points of view, conflict of interest because he is, of course, his wife is vice president for Pfizer.
Right.
He's got internal relations. Now, several people wrote letters to IG. I did, and I got a reply that it will be sent to Commission on Ethics, and Commission on Ethics said, like, you know, everything is fine. So what is our, you know, is absolutely not fine. We know that there is conflict of interest. We know that this guy is corrupted to the parliament, to the top. What can we do about that? I mean, you know, we know what's going on. We know that they're going to have, I don't know if this was known or not, but I think that they have a meeting on November 27th.
Oh, for the vaccine mandate in Montgomery County?
So basically, what can we do? I mean, we have to stop it somehow.
Oh, well, you know, everyone should sign up to testify at that meeting with
They
the.
do not do that.
What's that?
No, they actually do not allow people, you know, like people from the street, you know, they actually pick out, like, you know, people who want to testify on their own. I think so. So it's really hard to get through, and they have like only 5 people to testify.
Oh, I don't. You know, I'm going to defer to Dan because he's a politician and he knows about.
they're doing this, they're announcing that they're going to do this again in the legislature. Here we can go to a Ravens game with 110,000 people, mask-free, and even the governor's out there enjoying it. But yet in the State House and apparently in the council here, they won't let 5 people in the room. It's madness, it's unconstitutional. You need to assert your rights to be there politely, civilly, but deluge them with emails. And do whatever you can to communicate to their offices that you will organize against their reelection if they don't listen to you. Because they don't listen to anything else. That's kind of the big, the way to deal with politicians. But I'm not sure exactly the question. Other than that, I'm not sure the nature of the question. I don't know if we're supposed to be taking questions from the audience like I'm happy to, or okay. So my respect to those raising their hands, but I'm directed.
How effective are therapeutics? How come the administration is not promoting them? Well, first of all, this is a tough question. First of all, not many, I know there's big numbers of people who die from the coronavirus. I see them in the emergency department, they die, okay? It's terrible, and people are dying. It's not a fake disease. However, from what we learned from SARS-CoV-1 is that hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were effective. I mean, there's plenty of papers that show that. And in combination, not a single drug, but in combination, like monoclonal antibodies or Zithromax, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and aspirin. These things are actually keep people out of the hospital and keep people from dying. So therapeutics are very effective in a disease where already 99% of the people are going to do fine. So anyway, therapeutics are very effective. I think the reason why they're not promoted, because they're not big money makers, except for monoclonal antibodies. They're happy to give that, because that's big money. They're not, ivermectin is, pennies. And remdesivir, which is a dangerous drug, actually, and they give it to people when it's too late. The virus is long since gone by the time they start giving it only in the hospital, and it had a lot of side effects. They used it on Ebola, and they had a lot of people die when they used it there. They actually had to stop those studies in Africa early using the remdesivir. But anyway, there's other antivirals that are going to be in pill form, and they're going to be helpful. And I think it'll be a combination of medications, just like HIV and hepatitis B, a combination of medications working in different directions on the same virus that will have decreased mortality for this disease. Can you be terminated once you start the retirement process with Montgomery County government? Any from school health services here? Maybe not so much.
Because I went through that. What's the question? Once you start retirement, can you be terminated?
Can you be terminated once you started the retirement process with the Montgomery County government?
I would say for really specific questions like that, you should call a lawyer directly and speak with them, because all of these situations are so fact-specific that if you're in need of help, reach out to me or another employment law attorney. Even if you're dealing with a COVID issue, an employment lawyer will be really fantastic in helping you navigate something like that.
In a dental office, can my employer tell the patients my vaccine status or share that information with other dental office employees? I'm going to say it's a HIPAA violation, but I don't know. Okay. Add to that?
So I had a case once representing a young lady who worked at a hospital. They were making the nurses and healthcare workers wear different colored badges. So there was identifying them publicly, and that was removed. That's illegal. It was removed.
This is a Dan Cox question, I think, but how about Maryland legislation? Can they make the vaccine manufacturers liable? does the state law trump federal law?
No, it's the preemption doctrine. Federal law has spoken to this issue and preempts state law. It makes vaccines completely exempt from liability. It creates a vaccine court in Washington, D.C. Actually, it's in Rockville. And you have to have a specialized attorney to take your case, and you rarely get certified. When you do, it's if you died or if the individual died, you get very minimal cap damages. If they have a lifelong injury, you can apply for more damages.
Okay, this is another Dan Cox question. How will you, Dan Cox, stop vaccine mandates if you are elected with the loss of federal money? Something about with the loss of federal money.
Just like all the other Republican states that have preserved the freedom of their constituents, Florida, Texas, South Dakota, Missouri, all of these states are functioning just fine, and their citizens are free. And I don't care if we lose, that's the number one question I hear from a lot of legislators, like, well, you don't want to lose the money. I don't care, I don't want to lose the people. I will definitely reverse that, and I think if you put a lot of pressure on the federal government to expose what they're doing, there are certain dollars that have to come anyway, so there are ways to fight that.
Can they close down a business, I think that says, if we don't comply to the mandates?
Well, yes and no. You need to have a specific question for a specific lawyer and specific facts. The businesses have been targeted by the health departments, yes. Jennifer has fought some of these mandates. I've had a few cases involved too. I have a good friend who's leading the effort also out of Annapolis. And when the health department has no state of emergency from the governor right now, and yet is trying to usurp additional emergency powers, they have to prove that there's an emergency. The governor actually rescinded the emergency. So it's very hard for them to prove that there's a state of emergency. And if your health department's going to be proactive, like it is in Montgomery County, you could get fined and shut down, yes. That's an educational statement.
MCPS mandates vaccine for student athletes who want to join school sport teams. As a concerned parent, what can I do to deal with it? Can any legislator cancel the stupid vaccine mandate?
I've gotten this question from quite a few parents about the sports teams and the vaccine mandate, and I actually reached out to another attorney that I worked with on the case suing Montgomery County Public Schools over the vaccine mandate, really that applause should be for the Liberty Counsel and Josh Dixon, who was the attorney on that case. And I was kind of local counsel for him. But we had a discussion about the sports, because I know there's a lot of student athletes out there who are being faced with this dilemma. And my daughter is a very accomplished in the performing arts, so I can understand how difficult this issue is for parents who see their children who have put so much into sports and other extracurricular activities, and that's going to be taken away from them without getting this vaccine. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a strong legal basis in terms of bringing a litigation against the schools to stop this. This would be a situation, I think, definitely where you need to band together with other parents who are against their students being vaccinated, and force the school and the school boards not to issue this mandate or go forward with this type of mandate.
So can I just say one thing? There is a group of parents already that have already spoken to an attorney. We've all hired this attorney to represent us. Everybody has letters, excellent letter
Okay, that's
about
great.
all of that. But everybody that registered their kids and sent in that religious exemption form and the letter backing it up on why we should be able to have a religious exemption were turned down. Their children were rejected for the sports, and so now everybody's kind of like, well, now what do we do?
Right.
But I don't know that it's enough parents. I mean, there's probably 20 of us that have done this, but the school board, all of that, they need to hear it, write letters, do all of that
Right.
stuff, because the more parents that they hear from, whether or not you're represented by an attorney, the more important that is.
Yeah, definitely reach out to the school board
Yeah.
and let them know. I mean, I think, right, you could definitely do that. I mean, anyone could have hired me to write a letter, but I mean, the legal basis in terms of litigating, it wasn't very strong. And the sad fact is, by the time you do anything about it, the sports season's over.
Yeah.
And, it's really,
But there's a chance to then at least change it for the spring. The
Exactly.
sports season started today.
right, to
November
change it.
15th, it started today. So if your kid's not in, your kid's not in. But you could possibly change that and make a difference for some of these kids for the spring.
That's right. And also, the next mandate is just going to be a blanket mandate for all of our children from 5 up to go to school. And so really, parents need to really get strong about speaking out about this right now. Let's see.
Can I add one thing to that, Jennifer?
Oh, sure.
That September 30th, 2021, in the Washington Post, the Montgomery County Public School employees sued them and won by religious exemption.
Right.
So they allow the employees to have a religious exemption, but they will not allow, or they're not accepting religious exemptions to play winter sports.
I know.
So it's a double
It's because
standard.
sports are volunteer.
Right. That's where the problem comes in. It's like, and there's no protection, like with your job, there's protections under the EEOC laws, but those kinds of protections don't extend to lower sports. I mean, in college sports is a little bit different, but when sports in high school and middle school, you don't have those protections.
But as soon as they got sued, they did fold.
Well, that might be the angle, that it's going to affect their ability for college admissions possibly, or scholarships.
Well, but also to just put it out there, MCPS accepts religious exemptions for children to go to school, but they're not going to accept it
For sports. I know.
And it's still on the website, at least the last time I checked. I mean, I don't have any children, but I'm in this fight, I'm an MCPS employee, but I've looked at all that. They haven't removed it, it's still there, but they won't accept it for sports.
Yeah, I
Which is
know.
ironic.
It is. And then can students participate in PE unvaxxed, right, but not sports? I mean, exactly. That's like another example of, this Alice in Wonderland world that we're all living in right now.
I was just going to say that it's patently unconstitutional to deny a religious exemption. It's patently unconstitutional. It's the First Amendment violation. So I would hope that if the parents, I think she might have left now, but if the parents could obtain counsel and go to like Liberty Counsel or another group that does religious liberty protection, that might be a very viable, good case. And it's with the season starting. I mean, my goodness, you could possibly get a TRO. Again, just educationally discussing it, but that's an outrage. And I didn't know that was happening. That's an outrage. And I'll tell you, that's why...
They just took it away 2 weeks ago, too. So those that were expecting to file now cannot file.
They need to be sued. I'm sorry. These are tyrants that need to be sued. This is why when I coached cross country, I was so privileged to do that. They locked down the schools and it was non-discriminatory because nobody could play sports, right? Remember that last year? So I just coached a homeschool team. We had like 40 kids sign up because they had nothing else to do. No masks. We had the freedom, and we competed with other schools that were open across the Virginia Delmarva region. It was great. So if sue them, and if you can't sue them, prove, take your money elsewhere. I mean, pull your kid, it's 19,000, what is it, 19,000 in this county? That's just an outrage. I'm so sorry that's.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. So one thing I learned when I worked for Montgomery County Public Schools, okay, off the record.
You don't work anymore, don't worry about it.
Right, they're gonna come after me. You don't realize the power you have as a parent, okay? I remember my principal. If any parent called up and said, or sent a letter in, that I'm going to file a lawsuit if this isn't taken care of, I'm telling you, they jumped. I don't care if it was 10 feet, they jumped, because the one thing they didn't want was to be sued. So, get a lawyer, it's be worth the money, write a letter, send it to the principal, send a copy to the associate superintendent if your area, send a copy to the superintendent, okay? She wants to be hired, send a letter to her too, send a copy. That's all, you have nothing to lose, nothing to lose. That's my 2 cents.
I also want to tell you another thing that I was thinking, and that is, during this whole thing, we've all been very complacent that has led up to this, right? I mean, nobody can say that, oh yeah, we've been really vigilant about making sure that our rights are, restored or whatever. But one of the things that struck me when this whole thing started coming down is that I told my boss, people are going to die over this, and they have. But also, unfortunately, there are going to be kids that you should pull out of school or out of sports. And I understand, because I have 3 boys who are very passionate about football. But I told my son this year, if it comes down to it, and they're going to force a vaccine on you, you're not playing football. Period, end of story. So, I know it hurts, but it hurts to grow, right? The greater good is freedom. That's what we all want.
I don't know where it is.
Is there an organization coordinating large protests against the vax mandate? Provided we fall, a huge group has more impact. So I've only seen, as a candidate for office, I've only been invited to certain protests and public demonstrations, peaceful public demonstrations with certain employers, like Lockheed Martin has a pretty active one. I have heard about We the People, I know Beth has been involved. I've heard about Moms for Liberty. I honestly have not heard about a very, very large protest group that is coordinating. And honestly, what they've done with the OSHA rule, what they've done with all of the different backdooring through the through the employers, one of the reasons that the people in charge in our state right now can pretend as if there's no mandate is because they have privately backdoored it through the corporations through coercion. And then they have their hands clean, they think. They wash their hands. No, I'm sorry. It's coming from the health department of Maryland. They're bullying a lot of the license boards, and they're going straight around to the corporations, and it's just the way you have to deal with it is one at a time. And I know that Jennifer probably can speak to this too, but I'm fighting half a dozen different corporations, University of Maryland and Hopkins. I mean, all over. The larger corporations are pressing this, but the only way that I can, encourage you, if you're in a situation like that, is find other people in your organization to band together and to find an attorney and to strengthen numbers within your unit, kind of thing. And that tends to help have good significant results because they don't necessarily want to lose key players throughout an organization. I know the firefighters have had some significant improvements. I'm informed that Anne Arundel County, for instance, had 50 firefighters that banded together within the organization, and they hired a lawyer, and the next thing, they knew they didn't have to file a suit because the Anne Arundel County firefighting, whatever, backed off. So I think Montgomery County has also had some issues with that. But again, it's like the old communist rule. They take 2 steps forward and then they take 1 back, and you think you won. And then they're ready to take another 2 steps, and then, another 3 months from now. So it's vigilance, it's coordinating together within your companies. It's never backing down on your freedom and your rights. And like I said, educationally, there's a civil rights organization in Maryland called the Maryland Civil Rights Commission. And you need to get a lawyer, you need to consider filing a complaint there, because they don't have a right to trample on your freedoms, whether it's religion, whether it's medical disability, or any of these protected statuses.
I wrote that question. I'm looking at the protests on the streets in New York City and France and Australia. It's about 100,000 people. I'm looking at things online at like the Revolution on this YouTube channel. They have mass protests. 100,000 people in the streets. Australia, France, all these places. Why isn't the Montgomery County Republican Committee organizing with their voter polls? They've got names they can send out. Why isn't somebody on a political spectrum that seems to be more blue than red trying to organize a coordinated efforts where we can say this time, this day? Because unfortunately, Facebook will shut things down. We try to do anything on that. YouTube will shut things down.
So I think one of the issues, why is it that France is having mass protests? I mean, you look at the YouTube videos and some of these other European nations, and there's hundreds of thousands of people protesting, and yet here in America we don't have that. Well, I don't know the entire answer, but I can say that one thing that's likely different is in those countries there are mass mandates going on right now, and there are 0 exemptions. Now, one of the things that we're getting a lot of tread in Maryland, for instance, is there are a lot of companies honoring exemptions. So if you haven't put your exemption in your company, you might want to consider that, because by law, it's something they have to acknowledge. Your religion, your faith is protected. It's a protected status. And they want you to think it's not, but it is. So that's probably why there's not mass, groups right now, because there's so many people that are going along with it, number one, and then the rest of them are, frankly, potentially getting exemptions. Now, that's my little synopsis. I don't know. That's a good question. I wish everyone would rise up. And one of the points I would say to be encouraged with is the majority of Marylanders are on our side. That's how I'm going to win the governorship, by the grace of God. 'Cause let me tell you something. In Prince George's County, a deep blue Prince George's County, some of the numbers we've seen is 50% of the population rejects forced vaccination and experimentation. Okay? I'm the only candidate fighting that in the race. And at the same time, those who have taken the vax, gone along with the coercion, most of them don't like that. And so they might be a silent majority that sides with the rest of us. But I agree, I wish there were more vocal people.
I think the Montgomery County, I think Republican organizations will try to organize. Yes.
The Republican Party, right.
When you've got I wouldn't have the nurse, I'm at a principal, like everybody's teaching on her. There could be 100 other people that are just like her, but they're all in their home. So individually, you're going to feel like you're the outlier and they're not the ones who's in the majority. And just like with the news, everyone's like, oh, I watch CNN, I watch Fox, I don't watch any of those. I go online to like other channels and hear things directly.
So I agree with you, the Republican Party could take a bolder stand, but here's the problem that we have in front of us.
We need some volunteers.
First of all, we need more people volunteering on these issues. A lot of these groups have sprung up just like today. Secondly, you have to understand, in terms of politics, this is a hot button issue. And so here I am, one of the 42 delegates fighting this issue, 42 Republican delegates. Most of my friends on the Republican Party that are elected agree with me privately. But do you know what happens if you speak up? Where's Delegate Debray? Where's Senator Waugh? Hogan took him out because they dared to speak up. And I say that with a lot of regret because I actually supported Governor Hogan, but not anymore. He's taken a path that's gone against our liberties, and he needs to come back. He needs to come back to where he used to be.
I think we need to connect. So many of us feel isolated
build our strength. So the problem is, that I'm personally finding is I don't know how to make those connections with the people I work with.
I mean, yeah, I think that, you know, you've got to employ different strategies that we've used in the past. I mean, you can't connect on Facebook, you can't really connect on these different mainstream social media platforms because you're going to get censored. I know there is a group called, I think it's called Brothers of the DMV, and they're organizing a large protest in Washington on the 20th, this Saturday. So you might be able to look them up. But to speak to the comment about Australia and Europe and all the protests we're seeing there, everyone needs to understand in those countries, especially Australia, is very, very, very bad right now. They are locking down the country to people who are not vaccinated, who are not allowed, who are unvaccinated. You are not going to be allowed to leave your home if you're unvaccinated. In Austria, they've already done that. So what's happening in these other countries, and they're having these vaccine passports, these digital passports, not just to go into a grocery store, but you have to flash your passport on the glass door to open up at the grocery store to get the products out of the cabinet that you want to buy. I mean, it's really insane, the level of control. And this is why people are in the streets in those countries, because literally you cannot leave your home. If you leave your home without a mask on, the cops will arrest you for that, just walking outside without a mask. So it is important to figure out ways to connect. I mean, it's very difficult when everyone's working from home and you don't see people that you work with, so you don't really know what's going on. I don't know, these are difficult questions. There's a question here about the county council. I guess the meeting is on Zoom. The audience is muted and they limit the number of people who are allowed to speak. I think that, I was thinking about this, why couldn't a group get together and show up there's got to be some central headquarters where they're doing the Zoom hearing.
They're at their own houses. We've actually gone to their house meeting in the county.
They're at their own houses?
We have.
Go and...
We've gone to Elmer's house. But they
Oh yeah, you can send letters, but I was thinking if you could organize a larger visible protest somehow and send out press announcements and get the media there and go somewhere, and you need coverage or something to bring attention somehow to this issue.
All right, Pam, you want to come real quick? Yeah.
Thanks, you saved me.
Real quick.
Sure. Hi, I'm Pam, and I am putting together a private Facebook group for people who want to support Dan. And my user ID, or whatever, my username is Peace Space Vox, okay? It means voice of peace, whatever. The way I'm looking at this is that if we can strategize, we can make a huge difference. And just to what somebody was saying before, how do we go about this? I'm not perfect, I'm a volunteer, but I believe the input of everybody, we will be stronger together. And also one of the things is if you get a Dan Cox sign, put it in your dashboard while you're out and about. If you're able to make another sign to go along with it, with the text Cox to 797979, and also Cox for Freedom, you get the word out. And I have other ideas, and we can work together.
So we have one more thing. On the way out, there are some signs and stands. You're more than welcome to pick them up and take them. Please make sure before you leave you settle with your waitress or waiter and tip them well. And now we have a very special person here. Patience, Dan's daughter, and she's going to say a couple things.
All right, thank you. I just want to reiterate what Dan was saying earlier. We do have about 40 days left to fundraise before he has to go to session. So that means that this is literal crunch time for us. So we have a very short window to make money. We have a goal to reach by January 1st. So I'm asking, please, if everyone can please donate today. I have an envelope with me. You can meet me I'll be right up front here. but it is extremely crucial that we meet this deadline by January 1st. Whatever you can give would be amazing. I don't care if it's $5, I don't care if it's $2. If you can max out to $6,000, which is what each couple can do, even a business can give $6,000, that is extremely crucial. We're almost to our goal. We need 16 people to give $6,000. So we're almost there. We're literally around the corner, but we need you guys, and anything you can give, just meet me here. Make your checks out to Dan Cox for governor, and then I'll put them in this envelope here. Cash cannot exceed $100 though, so just keep that in mind. If you can do a check, that would be great. So, thank you.
All right, before we leave, I think we need to thank this phenomenal panel. And thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And together, we're going to get this done, okay?
Thank you. Thank you.